You're listening to the JAKIB Media Sports Network in partnership with AM 1490 Sports Betting Radio. Subscribe to the JAKIB Media channel on YouTube for access to all daily sports content.
All right, welcome back. It's the Friday Fix Madness edition here with the conference tournament action gearing up on a Friday going up until 10 p.m. And you heard the man before I came back. Make sure you're subscribed to the JAKIB Media YouTube channel, JAKIB Media. That's where you can find all of the conversations with John McMullen that we have nightly posted the next day, among a lot of other great content from John, from the guys over at the Middle. So make sure you are locked in to the YouTube channel. All right, let's bring John into the conversation now, and still plenty to get to. Restructures, pro days, and more. John, what's going on, man? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. We made it another week. I guess that's always something to celebrate. Maybe with a little pineapple-infused vodka here at Barrett Brooks.
Yeah, if you want to get crazy enough, I guess if that's what you're into, you go for it. I'll stay away from that, though, at least for tonight. So, all right, let's get started here, and let's start with the restructures. Brandon Brooks, and we're not surprised, right, John? But that's the announcement from today.
Yeah, not Barrett, but Brandon Brooks. Yeah, restructuring.
Brandon, sorry.
That to me is good news because there was at least a little bit of a chance. I don't think much. I put it at about 10 or 15% that the Eagles could look to move on from Brandon because of the injury situation, the contract. But when he is healthy, and that's a big if, as we said, with his age and his size and 2 Achilles injuries in essentially less than 3 years. So you got to cross your fingers, but if he's ready to go, if he's playing, I mean, if he's not the best guard in the league, he's right there behind Quentin Nelson. So we all talk about building up around Jalen Hurts to make things easier for Jalen Hurts. And I've said, everybody's focused on the skill position players. The easiest way to do it is to fix that offensive line. And the easiest way to fix that offensive line is to have a healthy Brandon Brooks and a healthy Lane Johnson, which, again, is you can't count on it, but, again, cross those fingers, and it's pretty darn good if they're out there.
So, I also saw Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs are working to restructure. Brady got an extension. I don't know if that's apples to apples, but I did read that, helps the team with cap space. And what I'm getting at, John, is it seems like each big player, not literally, but just the bigger stars on each team are pretty much forced to restructure. I don't know if they're forced or not, and that's where I want you to just fill us in on how this is all going down across the entire league.
No, a lot of times they're not forced, and there's 2 ways, and there's 2 sort of languages in contracts. Sometimes in the case of really big contracts, in the case of somebody like Patrick Mahomes, sometimes the language is already in there that allows the team to restructure the deal without the permission of the player. And I'm not saying that's the case in Mahomes. It usually is in that type of case. And then there's the more boilerplate wording where player has to agree to a contract extension. And when that happens, it can become more problematic, more difficult, and that's where you see guys getting released. And, for whatever reason, loggerheads, they don't want to agree to it. But, and then there's 2 types of extensions or 2 types of restructures, where a team goes to a player and says, look, you're just, haven't played up to your contract, whatever, you got to take less money. Or B, in the case of all the Eagles restructures, basically, the players aren't taking less money. They're just getting their money up front. So in a lot of ways, it's better for the player. You don't have to wait for your money and exchange for that. The Eagles get to prorate the money over the rest of the contract instead of a big lump. So in other words, if you have 3 years left on your deal and you're scheduled to make $15 million, well, the Eagles may make $12 million of that into a roster bonus, give it to you right away, and by doing that, they lower your salary down to $3 million, and they can spread that $12 million over that 3 years. So that's sort of the trick. And sometimes it's already written into your contract. You don't even need the permission of the player to do that.
And just to reiterate, how many more names and who are they do we anticipate from the Eagles to be restructured?
The final two would be Brandon Graham and Lane Johnson, and they might already have been done. It just has to be filed with the NFLPA, and then it slowly trickles out. Those two have been sort of in the pipeline for a while, and that'll be it. And then, the Eagles will probably still, again, try to trade Zach Ertz or release Zach Ertz, but it's not imperative, for the start of the new league year or anything of that nature. Marquise Goodwin's been another, sort of out of sight, out of mind. We'll see what the Eagles do with him. But as far as the major restructures, this is it with Brandon and Lane tacked on. And that's basically how the Eagles will get to the salary cap by next Wednesday.
So a story has emerged here, of course, regarding Lane Johnson, and this is from a couple years ago at least, but I'm sure there's been more recent examples of potential conflict or arguments, disputes, whatever. But Philadelphia Eagles general manager Howie Roseman and the offensive lineman Lane Johnson reportedly had an altercation prior to an October 2018 game in London against Jacksonville. This is from Jeff McLane's of the Philadelphia Inquirer, described the scene, noting the relationship between the two was already on edge. And at one point, I'm going to skip through some of this, Johnson stormed off and said, "I can't play for this guy," after Howie said, "Good, you have your mouthpiece in, now you can't say anything stupid."
Well, one, I got to give Howie credit. Because, Lane's about 6'6", 320, maybe on a bad day. All the credit in the world. To me, it strikes me as Howie trying to be one of the guys, so to speak, and that's how kind of Jeff described it as, Lane and Howie in the past had given each other the business, locker room talk, so to speak, and he thought he was, giving him a playful tug, but for whatever reason, Lane obviously was trying to play through injury. We always talk about people. You never know what type of mood somebody's in on a particular day. Who knows what's going on in their personal life, yada, yada. And, they're in a bad mood and they take it the wrong way. I think that's what happens. I don't think Howie Roseman is trying to bully Lane Johnson, but it's interesting. To me, it's a case study in, stay away, as they say, in NFL locker rooms. Locker rooms are supposed to be for the players. And generally, coaches don't go in locker rooms, never mind general managers. It's sort of their private space. And I think, Howie's got to get back to that. And it's interesting, after the season, at his season-ending press conference, I was asking him about Zach Ertz and the stories about a blow-up at practice and how his relationship was with Zach. completely different. And he went off, I don't know if you remember, Ryan, but he went off on that Moneyball tangent where he's talking about the movie and his kids were asking him, and that scene where, Brad Pitt tells Jonah Hill, to, cut somebody or whatever. And he told him how to do it. And he said, you got to be professional about it. And you got to keep your distance from the players, essentially. I think Howie needs to go back to that and take that advice, to be honest. He shouldn't be trying to, bull bleep with the players, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, what's he doing? Like what's he even doing there?
I think he wants to be one of the guys. Sort of that thing. We've had that discussion with. He's not a football guy, and he did it. There was also talk about Chip Kelly in there and how Chip Kelly and Tom Gamble would sort of talk behind Howie's back. I don't know if you want to say make fun of him, but anybody who's been around an NFL locker room, there is that sort of football guy camaraderie. Whatever, I don't know how you want to describe it. And Howie's not a football guy. And I think he's not looked at as a football guy by a lot of people in the industry. And I think that rubs him the wrong way. And he tries to fit in, for a lack of a better term. But, his strengths are different. I think he should embrace those strengths. And, don't worry about that kind of stuff. He's got a difficult job. Anytime you have to cut players, renegotiate, make difficult decisions, not everybody's going to like you. So, if I had that job, that would be where I would approach it from and say, well, I know I'm going to be unpopular anyway, so I'm not going to get into personal relationships here because it can only muddy things. But that's what I think is going on. He's trying to be one of the guys, and he shouldn't be trying to be one of the guys.
But that's not – I feel like I hear you, and I agree, but he should be able to read the room. Like, when someone isn't a fan of you, so why are you talking to him like that? It's not like he's saying, hey, Lane, on this play, make sure you – it just doesn't seem like –
Well, I think – and if you read Jeff's article, they did have that relationship. So they did sort of bust each other's chops at times. And anybody who's met Lane, Lane can give it and take it as well as anybody. He's a really funny guy, and can talk a little bit of what.
Right.
And again, that's good. If you're his friend, if you're his teammate, when you're his boss, it might be great for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And then again, something's wrong. And in the piece, Jeff specifically mentioned a personal issue he's going through. And all of a sudden, something that's maybe a little bit off the cuff or not serious is taken seriously. And I think the bigger problem, as I said, is not the one issue that everybody's going to latch onto. And I understand why everybody's latching onto it. I think the bigger issue is he shouldn't have put himself in that position thinking, I can mess around with the players. That's not your job to mess around with the players. Go up to the third floor. Don't mess with the players.
So what does this story mean to you, John? Like, is this something, is this nothing, or is it just, more examples of what we already know?
I think it's more examples of what we already know. I mean, the Eagles, and I've been saying for a couple of weeks now, it's more Jeffrey Lurie than Howie Roseman, not vice versa. Jeffrey's comfortable with Howie Roseman. So, people want to focus on Howie, and they want Howie fired and all that. Well, only one guy can fire him, and he's not going to fire him because he's comfortable with him. So if you, almost to me by nature, if you have that big of a problem with Howie Roseman, well, then you got to look elsewhere. You got to look to the real center of the problem. And there was sort of an explanation in the story as well with their relationship and the fact that, basically Jeffrey listens to one guy, and that's Howie Roseman. So there's, I guess, good to that, and most people would think more bad to that. But I also think Jeff was very fair and pointed out that the Eagles have been more successful than most teams with this setup. So you have to be fair about it. And to his credit, I think he was fair in the story.
Talking with John McMullen for his nightly appearance right here on The Fix. Follow him at JF McMullen, PhillyVoice.com, SI.com, host of Extending the Play, which you can listen to tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. right here on 1490 Sports Betting Radio. All right, so Jeffrey Lurie came out to start this week saying no quarterback competition, which basically implies they're going to look elsewhere with the number 6 overall pick, meaning not the quarterback spot. Yet, Shane Steichen and Brian Johnson took in a certain quarterback's pro day today, John. So fill us in there. I know you wrote about it as well on SI.com.
Yeah, Trey Lance's pro day at North Dakota State today, and Shane Steichen and Brian Johnson were there representing the Eagles. And, two ways to look at it. Last time they were in North Dakota State for a big quarterback. Howie was there, Doug was there, Jeffrey Lurie was there. Maybe the first time, maybe the last time he was in North Dakota, for all I know. But he even took Carson Wentz to dinner after his pro day. So I wouldn't overblow the fact that Shane and Brian Johnson were there. In fact, as I wrote on Sports Illustrated, more of a plausible deniability thing. If you think about 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, if Trey Lance turns into a star quarterback, and by the way, he has got a massive upside. Talking to scouts around this league and personnel people, and texting with people today, I mean, he's got a ceiling that is as high as you're going to see. Now, also, he's probably the classic boomer bust guy. So, by having Brian Johnson there, by having Shane Steichen there, you give yourself a plausible deniability. You say, we did our due diligence, but we thought so-and-so, insert whoever the Eagles are going to pick, was better. And that's sort of how the NFL does business. And by the way, that's just not the Eagles. That's everybody. But, Jeffrey has said quarterback's not on the table. I've been above board. That shouldn't be the case. They should be able to evaluate this kid with everybody else. And look, maybe they come to the conclusion they don't want him in a real fashion. But he should be in the mix, man. Anybody in the top half of the draft that is expected to go in the top half of the draft, the Eagles personnel department should be able to evaluate, should be able to consider, and that's just not the case. So, to me, that's the bigger problem with the Eagles right now than any sort of salacious gossip from a couple of years ago.
How much does, these pro days really matter, John? Like, you're not going there and saying, well, let's make a decision. Like 9 times out of 10, you're going there to show the player how serious you are. That's, you mentioned Jeffrey Lurie, Doug, Howie, all going to North Dakota for Wentz. Maybe seeing 1 or 2 things in person after watching a ton of film. But would you agree or disagree? Just fill us in on how these teams approach the pro days, because we know the amount of homework they're doing outside of those.
Typically, yeah. I in a typical year, I don't think they're that important, to be honest. More about getting to know the player personally, face to face, that kind of thing for teams. And that's been much curtailed, obviously, during the pandemic, although things seem to be lightening up a little bit at least. But it's more important this year because there's no combine. So this is the only time for scouts and personnel people to see these particular players in person, get the measurements, make sure they reach that, I always say, the threshold to play whatever position you're looking at. Every NFL team sort of has a threshold for whatever. If it's, an offensive lineman and the bench press, a defensive edge rusher and the three-cone, a wide receiver, better run a certain 40, that type of thing. So you have to make sure they reach that point to where you think, okay, they have an NFL skill set, and then the other stuff comes in. I do think Lance is more interesting than most because he only played 17 games in North Dakota State because of the pandemic, and they shut down. They didn't play this year, essentially. They played one game. So he won the national championship. He won undefeated. He became this huge prospect. Didn't get to play. I think a weird part of it is, though, and this is the interesting part if you think about the Eagles. So instead of playing, he went down to Atlanta with Quincy Avery. He's the same quarterback coach, quarterback tutor that Jalen Hurts has. And Deshaun Watson works with him as well. So he's been working with that guy. And I think it's interesting for this reason. Typically, when you talk to NFL scouts, they always bemoan, and I can tell you this firsthand, about how poor the mechanics are of college quarterbacks these days because the game has changed. We've talked about this a lot, you and I. And the footwork is poor. And if you think about Carson Wentz coming out of North Dakota State, that was the biggest issue. And I've said for years, 5 years in, he never really improved from it. And Trey Lance, instead of getting ready for the next game, preparing to beat whoever North Dakota State was going to play, he was down in Atlanta with Quincy working on all his mechanics and working on his footwork and working on his throwing motion, which scouts say was a little bit elongated. So, I thought it was interesting today because I put Matt Bowen's scouting report up, and his first two sort of knocks on Trey Lance was just what I said. His footwork when throwing deep balls to the third level and his throwing motion. And then all of a sudden he shows up at the pro day, and he's been working for months and months and months, 8 hours a day on his mechanics. And Daniel Jeremiah says, throwing motion looks a lot better. His footwork looks a lot better. In a weird way, not playing and just doing that sort of knee work on his mechanics may help Trey Lance. And so I think he's going to be one of the most interesting sort of case studies in recent NFL history to see what means more. Maybe working on that stuff means more than playing meaningless games on Saturday. You're going to win by 40 points.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and maybe we can get a little bit more into that tomorrow. I'll be with John tomorrow morning as he is the host of Extending the Play at 10 a.m. So, John, why don't you fill the listeners in for everything we're going to get into, that you're going to get into tomorrow morning on Extending the Play?
Well, you and I think we're going to get into that because I find that pretty interesting. And I think Trey Lance is, we're going to be talking about this for years and years and years if he becomes a superstar player. And I got to tell you, I was pretty impressed by him today. obviously just via Zoom and all that kind of stuff. But more so talking, as I said, to scouts about him and just how much talent he has. So I want to get into that, political football of him playing at the same school as Carson Wentz and why that means absolutely nothing. I can't believe people are hung up on that. And also Jeff's story, because we got to get into that as well, because, this Jeffrey Lurie, Howie Roseman, and coaching dynamic, we got to bring up Nick Sirianni, how he fits into that as well, and that's what I wrote about on Philly Voice this week. Nick Sirianni's job is about far more than X's and O's, and I'm going to explain that on the show as well.
There you go. Extending the play. John McMullen. I'll be live in studio as well every Saturday, so make sure you tune in tomorrow morning to hear John and I get into all of that and more, 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Make sure you subscribe to JAKIB Media on YouTube at JAKIB Media, at JF McMullen on Twitter, Philly Voice, and SI.com. All right, John, another week in the books, and we'll do some more of this tomorrow morning.
All right, we made it. Let's do it. Let's extend the play, Ryan.
Extend the play, baby. All right, John. Later, man.
All right, thanks, man.
There he is, J-Mac.
The middle.
I'm out on fishing in areas like...
Come on, bro. You're about to have a kid, and he's going to want to go fishing. Uncle B can't take him fishing all the time. You got to learn to fish, bro.
It's a good point.
What do you mean it's a good point? My ability to father my child relies solely on taking him fishing?
Yes, Mr. Predicto.
All right, what's the question for Mr. Predicto here?
About your ability to father a child.
Well, it has to be yes or no, okay?
Will your son want to go fishing?
Well, my son, my boy, want to fish.
Uh-oh.
The signs say no.
Huh?
Oh!
That's it. I'm walking off the set like Maury. Boom, boom. I'm out.
Drop the mic.
See ya.
You're not capable of dropping the mic.
Oh, my goodness.
I'll roll with that Mr. Predict. This is my guy right here.
The Middle with Eitan Shander, Barrett Brooks, and Harry Mays. Weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern.